According to basically every metric we have, Lionel Messi is one of the most liked people on the planet. He's got the biggest brands behind him and a social media following that dwarfs almost everyone else. But here's the thing. Messi, just like Michael Jordan or Serena Williams before him, also faces a very specific kind of backlash. It's not a fluke. It's actually a pattern we see over and over again in psychology. When someone dominates for this long, success stops being just inspiring and starts being polarizing. Today, we're diving into why greatness, almost by definition, is never just about the fans. It's also about the critics. Let's start with a concept that comes quite literally from symbolic Australian agriculture: the tall poppy syndrome. Picture a field full of poppies. Most of them grow to about the same height, but then one rises above the rest. Taller, brighter, impossible not to notice. And the moment it stands out, it attracts two things at once: attention and the urge to cut it down so it matches the rest of the field again. That, in essence, is tall poppy syndrome. Across countless cultures, the pattern is the same. When someone becomes too visibly successful, they don't just inspire people, they also make people uncomfortable. Because whether they mean to or not, they become a walking reminder of everyone else's limits, of the ceiling other people haven't been able to break. Some societies, like Australia and parts of Scandinavia, have even built explicit social norms around this idea, actively discouraging people from appearing too successful, too proud, or too far ahead of the group. And social psychology gives us a more formal explanation for why that discomfort happens. In 1954, psychologist Leon Festinger proposed social comparison theory, the idea that people constantly evaluate themselves by comparing themselves to others, especially to people who are close to them in the same arena. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because when the gap between me and the person who stands out becomes too large and too public, the comparison stops being motivating and starts to sting. And when that sting lasts for years, with no real hope of closing the distance, it often transforms into something emotionally easier to carry than envy itself: rejection. It's easier to say, "I just don't like him," than to admit, "It bothers me that I can't reach what he reached." And in modern football, no example captures this dynamic more clearly than Messi and Argentina. This isn't just about an extraordinary player, it's about an extraordinary player who kept winning, relentlessly, repeatedly, almost without interruption. Domestic leagues, Champions Leagues, Copa America titles, World Cups, not as a one-off peak, but as a nearly 20-year plateau of greatness. And that matters, because when greatness is not a moment, but an era, tall poppy syndrome doesn't get time to cool off between achievements. It builds, layer after layer, year after year, until for the people already irritated by that dominance, the discomfort becomes permanent background noise. But there's a second mechanism at play here, one even more specific. Psychology calls it schadenfreude, the uncomfortable, but very real pleasure people feel when someone they see as superior stumbles. And this isn't just a poetic idea. Social neuroscience has documented it extensively. Brain imaging studies have shown that when people watch a high-status figure fail, especially someone they don't identify with, the brain activates some of the same reward circuits associated with pleasure and personal success. In other words, for a typical human brain, watching someone above you fall can feel rewarding. Not because people are secretly evil, not because there's something uniquely wrong with them, but because that's how human reward systems often process the collapse of someone who has felt unreachable for a very long time. That's why videos like Messi's worst misses or Argentina's biggest failures generate just as much traffic as highlight reels celebrating their brilliance. For different audiences, both types of content deliver the same thing: emotional payoff. And once you see that, a broader pattern becomes obvious. This happens with every sports dynasty. When Michael Jordan ruled 1990s basketball, he inspired millions and also generated a smaller but very real backlash, especially among rival fan bases who watched their own ceilings grow farther and farther from Chicago's. When Serena Williams dominated women's tennis for 2 decades, she faced a level of scrutiny and criticism wildly disproportionate to what should have come with success alone, something she herself pointed out publicly many times, with the added layers of gender and race making the pattern even more complex. The point is, this phenomenon doesn't depend on the sport, it doesn't depend on the country, it doesn't even depend that much on the personality of the person winning. It depends mostly on one combination: extreme success, sustained over time. And in Argentina's case, there's another ingredient: visibility. Argentine fans don't just support their team, they arrive in huge numbers. They fill World Cups with color, noise, songs, and presence. They can make a neutral stadium feel like home. They can visually take over spaces that on paper aren't theirs. And depending on who's watching, that can be read in two completely different ways. If you identify with them, it looks like passion. If you don't, it can feel like invasion. That contrast matters, because even when there's no aggressive intention behind it, that intensity amplifies the discomfort already created by long-term success. It turns admiration into irritation faster. It makes dominance feel louder. Now, it's worth separating two things that often get mixed together. The first is structural rivalry, the almost inevitable tension that appears when someone dominates a shared space for a long time. The second is specific incidents, emotional, dramatic moments that later get used as proof to justify a dislike that was already there. Argentina versus the Netherlands in the 2022 World Cup is a perfect example. 18 yellow cards, a World Cup record, heated exchanges, Messi's now iconic confrontation with Wout Weghorst after the Dutch elimination, and then Louis van Gaal publicly criticizing Argentina's behavior as disrespectful. That game gave people something concrete, a scene, a clip, a symbol. But that's the key. For many people, the rejection didn't begin there. That moment simply gave visible form to a discomfort that had been building for years for much deeper, more structural reasons, rooted in social comparison and prolonged exposure to greatness. And this connects to another powerful cognitive bias, the tendency to generalize from a vivid incident. One emotionally charged moment that gets replayed endlessly will weigh far more in collective memory than hundreds of ordinary, uneventful matches. Nobody makes a viral compilation of perfectly normal, respectful games. People remember the tension, the outburst, the controversy. That imbalance shapes perception. It builds an image that can become much harsher than the full evidence would justify, not just of a player, but of an entire country. It's the same reason that, decades later, Maradona's handball against England in 1986 is still easier for many people to recall than countless other moments of his brilliance. The vivid sticks, the emotional sticks, the dramatic sticks, even when the routine excellence was much larger in volume. There's also something revealing when you compare Messi to the other giant of his era, Cristiano Ronaldo. Both men are overwhelmingly admired, and both men also inspire rival communities of fans who feel a psychological need to insist that their idol is objectively superior. And once someone builds part of their identity around that belief, every achievement by the other player stops feeling like neutral sports news. It starts to feel personal, like a threat. You don't actually have to hate Messi to need him to lose. You just have to have built part of your identity around the idea that Cristiano is better, something millions of people did, sincerely and without bad intentions, over more than a decade of constant media rivalry. And this pattern goes far beyond football. Federer and Nadal divided tennis audiences into Team Roger and Team Rafa. In some cases, that fan identity became almost as emotionally intense as national team rivalries, even though Federer and Nadal themselves publicly showed genuine respect for each other. That's the deeper pattern underneath all of this. When two dominant figures coexist for long enough, audiences don't just choose preferences, they choose identities. And once identity enters the picture, objectivity leaves the room. So in the end, greatness almost always divides, not because there's something wrong with the person who reaches it, but because the human brain processes visible, sustained success as a constant comparison. And constant comparison, when the gap becomes too big and too public, produces two possible reactions: inspiration or discomfort. Messi and Argentina are not some strange exception in sports history. They are simply the most extreme and most recent version of a pattern that shows up every time someone stays at the top for too long. And the truth is, this isn't even limited to elite sports. The same structure appears, on a much smaller scale, everywhere. The coworker who gets promoted faster than everyone else, the friend whose relationship seems to work effortlessly, the neighbor whose business keeps growing while yours stalls. All of them can trigger that same uneasy mix of genuine admiration and painful comparison. The only real difference is the size of the audience. In football, it becomes rivalry between nations. In ordinary life, it usually stays as silence, awkward, private, and rarely admitted out loud. So maybe the most interesting question isn't why a minority of people reject those who dominate. Maybe the real question is what each of us does with the discomfort we feel when we see someone far more successful than us in something that matters to us. Do we turn it into inspiration? Or do we turn it into a need to see them fall? And since we're already talking about comparison, rivalry, and the need for the other side to lose in order to feel like you've won, in the next video, we look at the exact other side of this story. The bug. Cristiano Ronaldo. For 20 years, Ronaldo carried a kind of pressure Messi never had to carry in quite the same way, competing match after match, trophy after trophy, against a rival much of the world seemed to prefer, even when he won. What does that do to a person's mind? What happens when you spend your entire career performing at the highest level, knowing that no matter what you do, part of the world will still look the other way? That's the question we'll answer in the next video. Don't miss it. And if you like this way of looking at sports through the lens of psychology, subscribe to the channel. Every week we break down a real story to uncover the mind behind it. See you in the next one.